Hi, I'm Andrew from Parlogram. I hope you're well and have been enjoying the holidays and have found time to relax with a few YouTube videos. Before we start, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's watched one of our videos in 2024, especially if you're one of our 25,000 new subscribers. We've covered a lot of subjects in the videos we've done this year. But of course, the highlight of our year was our trip to Abbey Road, which you'll see more of in this video. So once again, I'd like to thank the masterful Miles Scholl and Universal for making that particular dream come true. All that remains for me to do here is to wish you a very happy and peaceful new year and invite you to sit back, relax and enjoy the Parlogram review of 2024. Released on July the 10th, 1964, the Beatles' third studio album A Hard Day's Night is one of the greatest pop albums of all time.
Don't be soft.
The Beatles, John especially, often did their best work under the pressure of a deadline, and within a few days of being asked, John came up with the goods, which he took into the studio on April the 16th. Journalist Maureen Cleave later recorded helping him put a finishing touch to the lyrics in the studio on that day. John had scrawled down the lyrics on the back of a birthday card that had been sent by a fan to his son Julian. The original line read, "When I get home to you, I find my tiredness is through." Finding the line about tiredness weak, Maureen Cleave suggested, "When I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel all right." John liked it, borrowed her pen and promptly changed the line. That birthday card with the lyrics written on it is now on display in the British Library. The song was completed in just 9 takes 3 hours later. But one of the biggest challenges on the way to that final take was the famous opening chord.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not it. 1, 2, 3, 4. I missed the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Now, as good as a guitarist George was, he always liked to have time to craft a solo and was generally not one for making up solos on the spot. So after his early attempts at one on A Hard Day's Night fell by the wayside, he decided to leave it until later. Then, with the help of George Martin, he overdubbed it at half speed, which when played back at full speed would be perfect. But this is how the solo sounded at the speed the two Georges recorded it at. As the 1960s dawned in the UK, the craze for American rock and roll and its British cousin skiffle seemed to be all over. The British charts were now populated by the saccharine sound of tracks like Elvis's Wooden Heart and squeaky clean pop from the likes of Neil Sedaka and Helen Shapiro. However, there was one British group who emerged at this time, whose look, sound and musical ability was fresh and exciting and, dare I say it, edgy, and that group was called The Shadows. Although better known as Cliff Richard's backing band, The Shadows were, in 1961, out on their own, and were, without doubt, the coolest British band of the day. Fronted by bespectacled lead guitarist Hank B. Marvin, who, like Buddy Holly, but unlike John Lennon, was not ashamed to wear his glasses on stage. Marvin not only walked the walk, but talked the talk, and his playing influenced a generation of guitarists, ranging from David Gilmour and Pete Townsend to Neil Young, Brian May and Mark Knopfler. Now listen to any live recording of the Beatles, and Paul's bass always seems to be very loud. But strong bass was not something EMI liked or allowed on their records. Increased bass levels were to be avoided at all costs, as it would make the record player's styluses jump. This resulted in Paul's bass being pretty much non-existent on their early records. But there was no such limitations on the Polydor recordings, and the bass response on Cry for a Shadow is immense and of window-rattling proportions. Like Norman Petty with Buddy Holly, Camford knew exactly what he was doing with the Beatles. Cry for a Shadow is a great example of a simple song, perfectly recorded, and is, I think, one of the best sounding recordings they ever made. What do all these tracks have in common? That's right, they all feature the mellotron. The mellotron is a remarkable musical instrument. In the 1960s, it opened up a whole new world of musical sounds and landscapes for bands like the Moody Blues, the Rolling Stones, and of course, the Beatles. It went on to become fundamental to the sound of progressive rock in the 1970s and was heavily utilised on both record and stage by groups such as King Crimson, Yes and Genesis. And in the 1980s and 90s with groups like OMD and Oasis who used it on their records. The mellotron was built in Birmingham in the early 1960s by a British company called Streatley Electronics. Inside its grand-looking cabinet was a bank of pre-recorded lengths of 3/8 of an inch tape, each lasting 8 seconds. When a key was pressed, the mechanism would play back the length of tape until it reached its end. When the key was released, it would then, with the aid of a spring, quickly rewind back to its starting point. The mellotron held 18 instrument sounds, which you would play using the right-hand bank of keys, and 18 sets of rhythms, which you would play on the left-hand bank. Each rhythm recording was actually a band playing a specific chord in a certain style, such as Latin, jazz or orchestral. This meant that with practice, you could create a full backing band with your left hand and a lead instrument with your right, like this. The mellotron is all over an album we looked at last weekend on the channel, The Zombies, Odyssey and Oracle. Here's the introduction to a track on that album called Changes.
This is actually the only mellotron that was built in the United States, and it was the last attempt of building a mellotron before all those digital instruments came to the market. The special one on this instrument, that's why it's called 4-track, is that you have 4 tracks below every key, and you could play and mix those 4 tracks. So you could just like have on the A channel a flute and strings on the B channel, and you could put them all together, which was not possible on the earlier Mellotrons.
In April 1964, the Rolling Stones released one of the greatest and most influential debut albums in the history of rock music. Anxious to make up for not signing the Beatles, Decca afforded the Rolling Stones a very favourable contract for the time. Not only were they given a royalty rate 3 times higher than similar groups at that time, they would also be allowed to have full artistic control of their recordings and ownership of the master tapes. The deal also allowed them to record outside Decca studios, so it was in a tiny mono-only studio lined with egg boxes on the ceiling for sound treatment called Regent Sound Studios in London's Denmark Street that the Rolling Stones recorded their debut album. The album was a heady mix of R&B and blues covers, which, like the EP before it, reflected their stage show. And because there were hardly any overdubs, it was just like a live Stones show. Although 9 out of the 12 songs on the UK album were cover versions, the Stones made them their own. The next song on the album was Tell Me, the first recorded number credited to Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, and it has a very interesting history on this album. Early first pressings of the UK album mistakenly included a shorter and completely different take of the song. It's a kind of demo version lasting 2 minutes and 52 seconds, instead of the 4 minutes and 6-second version which quickly replaced it. These early copies can be identified by their side 2 matrix number, which have either 1A or 2A suffixes. Copies which have 3A or higher all carry the long, regular version. It's not known exactly how many copies containing the demo version were pressed, but copies of it can sell for anything between £1,000 and £2,000 today, depending of course on condition. A few weeks ago, when I was preparing the video about Cry for a Shadow, I wanted to find a way of isolating the bass from that record and separate the drums and guitar parts. And in the process of my research, I came across something which could do exactly that. LALAL.ai, or LaLaLi, as they and I will call it from now on, is an AI web-based stem splitter. The first thing to do is to go to LALAL.ai, where you'll be greeted with this page. To upload the track you want to separate, click on Select Files, then choose the file from your computer. In this case, I'm going for the Beatles track Rain. The screen will then display the status of your upload. The length of time your track takes to upload will depend on the speed of your internet connection. It took around 20 seconds to complete for me. Once uploaded, it'll take a further 20 seconds for the site to generate the previews you requested, which in this case is a vocal instrumental split, with the vocal track on top and the instrumental below. The yellow volume bar indicates the preview which is active, and to hear it, just press the play symbol.
Into the shade when the sun shines down. When the sun shines down.
To listen to the instrumental track, simply mute the vocal preview and turn on the one beneath, and then hit the play symbol. Now, one of the highlights of this track is of course Ringo's drums, so let's select that for the next separation by selecting it in the menu on the left. After around 15 seconds, you've got another pair of previews. the drum track on its own, and the track without the drums. Let's listen to the drum track. Let's try another one. This time, I'm going for Penny Lane. Now, I've shortened the sequence here a bit to save time. Let's listen to the vocals.
Penny Lane, there is a barber showing photographs of every head he's had the pleasure to know.
And now, here's the instrumental. Let's try another stem from this track. How about the piano? And now the track without the piano.
Penny Lane, there is a barber showing photographs of every head he's had the pleasure to know, and all the people that come and go.
Now those 30-second previews are all free. You don't even have to sign up. But if you want to separate the entire track and download the stems, you'll need to buy some processing time from one of these packages, which at the time of recording look like this. €18 gets you 90 minutes, €25 buys 300 minutes, and 35 gets you 500. I bought 500 minutes because I think I'm going to use this a lot. Once you've bought a pack, you can either have the files emailed to you, or you can download the app on your phone or desktop, which then downloads the files directly to your device. Once you've downloaded your stems, you can mix them in any way you like, by using a program like Audacity, for example, which is free, and a link to that is in the description. Now, this video isn't sponsored by La La La, but if you buy one of the packs, I'll get a small kickback, which helps to keep the channel going. So click on the link in the description and get yourself started. Believe me, once you get into this, you'll be playing with it for hours. It's truly addictive and amazing. Now, the results at the moment aren't perfect, but this technology is improving at lightning speed, and the separations are just going to get better and better, which means more fun for us who love to mess around with this sort of thing. In January 1984, after 3 years of waiting, Yoko finally gave fans what they've been waiting for: John Lennon's last solo album. This month sees the 40th anniversary of the release of Milk and Honey, a top 10 album in its time, but one which is virtually forgotten today. Then, on January the 9th, almost 3 years since the release of Watching the Wheels, came the news we'd all been waiting for. Nobody Told Me had started life in the mid-70s as a demo called Everyone's Talking, Nobody's Talking, and like many of that era, was recorded by John at his piano in the Dakota, accompanied by a beatbox. The song expressed John's frustrations with his and modern life in general, and, true to form, included some memorable lyrics and wordplay.
Everybody's talking, no one says a word. Everybody thinks of nobody cares. There isn't real fun way just below the stairs.
Although his demo included many of the lines which ended up in the finished song, they weren't quite yet in the right order. For example, the line in the demo, "There's a little green hill far away, just below the stairs," would be replaced in the release version by "There are Nazis in the bathroom, just below the stairs." That line was inspired by a 1911 poem by J. Milton Hayes called The Green Eye of the Yellow God, which originally read like this: "There's a one-eyed yellow idol to the north of Kathmandu. There's a little marble cross below the town. There's a broken-hearted woman tends the grave of mad Karoo, and the yellow god forever gazes down." This was a poem or monologue which would have been well known to those of John's generation, especially by those who grew up listening to radio shows like The Goons. Another line in the song, "They're starving back in China, so finish what you got," was another phrase commonly heard by the post-war generation, and was certainly one which you could imagine Aunt Mimi saying to John. Another line in the song, "There are UFOs over New York and I ain't too surprised," was inspired by his own sighting of a UFO, which he wrote about in the liner notes to his Walls and Bridges album, and talked about on camera to the BBC.
Up there, I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
The song also appears on a list John wrote when it was still in the demo stage, where he was adding notes about the type of sound he was going for on each. After Nobody Told Me, he wrote Instant Karma. And it's true, the song does have a kind of Instant Karma vibe about it, and even begins with the same 3-4 count-in.
D4. D4.
Reviews of Milk and Honey appeared in all the music papers the following week. Record Mirror's review was fairly sanguine and went like this. If you find the Lennons' public display of love a little tiresome, there's plenty to wince at, but equally much to be touched by if it moves you. Lennon's songs have moments of haunting simplicity, even if they do tend to sound over-Americanized. I'm Stepping Out and I Don't Want to Face It even sound like early Talking Heads. In a review titled Sweet and Sour, the Melody Maker's Colin Irwin gave his honest and I think fairly accurate opinion of the album. Had he lived, Milk and Honey might have been the album to have restored his musical muscle. Certainly the single Nobody Told Me suggests that he was rediscovering his more natural, fiery nature. With mentions of Nazis in the bathroom, the starving Chinese, and yellow idols in Kathmandu, it's a million times more enigmatic than Pipes of Peace, that's for sure. On Nobody Told Me, Lennon still seems a little muted. Not genuinely angry the way he did it is most compelling, but at least he sounds aware, which is much more than can be said about any of Double Fantasy. For me, at the time of its release, Milk and Honey felt like a gift from the gods, and I played it to death during those first few months of 1984. But to be honest, it's spent very little time on my turntables since. And it's an album which doesn't make me feel as sad as Double Fantasy does. And, now I'm older, I'm fonder of it than I was at 17. Every Beatles fan has a favourite album. Most Beatles fans have a favourite song. But what about those songs at the other end of the scale? Tell Me What You See was another song the Beatles put forward for inclusion in the Help film. But like You Like Me Too Much, Lester found it weak and just not strong enough for the film. Written mainly by Paul, the song was recorded in just 4 takes over 2 hours on February 18th, 1965, the same session as the ill-fated If You've Got Trouble. It's a very simple and straightforward recording that consisted of Paul on bass, Ringo on drums, and John on his Fender Stratocaster. George was relegated to playing the guiro, an Afro-Cuban rhythm instrument which looks like a grooved cylinder and is rubbed with a stick. Released on the UK edition of Rubber Soul, What Goes On was one of the 4 tracks left off the American version of that album. Instead, Capitol used it for the B-side of the Nowhere Man single in December 1965 and included it on the Yesterday and Today album in June 1966. The song itself has a very interesting history, as it was one of the first songs John Lennon ever wrote. It was originally demoed back in 1963 on This Acetate, and was one of the songs up for consideration as their 3rd single, which eventually became From Me to You. The chorus of the 1965 recording is identical to that of the 1963 demo, but the lyrics of the verses were completely rewritten, with the odd word or phrase thrown in by Ringo.
How can I conceal the thrill that I feel? Is our love still real? Tell me if this is so, I wanna know.
Now, John Lennon worshipped Elvis Presley's early recordings, and Run for Your Life is basically John channeling early Elvis. The opening line of the song, I'd rather see you dead, little girl, than to be with another man, is itself a shameless lift from Elvis's 1955 recording of Baby Let's Play House.
I'd rather see you dead, little girl, than to be with another man, and baby, come back.
It was a song which John himself later confessed to hating, and is one which is disliked by many today. mainly for its lyrics, which have been called vicious, nasty and sexist. By contrast, it was a song George Harrison really liked. For John and Paul in 1963, Little Child was a work song. Work songs were ones they wrote with other artists in mind, or ones to be used as last-minute fillers for an album. In 1980, John recalled that this song had been originally written for Ringo, but having just recorded I Wanna Be Your Man a few days before, he refused to sing it. Hence, John had to sing it himself on the With The and Meet the Beatles albums. As with another work song, Hello Little Girl, which they gave away to fellow Liverpool group The Foremost, its lyrics can be seen as a bit creepy today, and as some sources have said, made them sound like tired hacks. Although cited by many today as being their favourite Beatles album, Abbey Road includes the song many fans like the least of all. Right from their first album, Paul had always been aware of how important it was to appeal to a broad audience. He did this by including standards such as A Taste of Honey and Till There Was You, and then by writing similar songs himself, such as Yellow Submarine and Obla Di Obla Da. Frustratingly for the other members of the Beatles, these were the songs that Paul seemed to spend the most time on, and Maxwell's Silver Hammer was such a track. Written at a time when business dealings were becoming difficult, the song was an analogy for those troubles. Now, Paul is a master of masking in his songwriting, and this song was a front for his frustrations and desire to get back at those who were breaking up the band. The song epitomizes the downfalls of life, he explained in the Beatles anthology book. Just when everything is going smoothly, bang bang, down comes Maxwell's Silver Hammer and ruins everything. However, the song has not aged well, and its dark theme about the intentions of a murderer, however humorously delivered, don't sit easy with fans today. Even though he was absent from most of its recording due to his car crash in Scotland, John hated it with a passion and had this to say about it in an interview about the album in 1969.
Yeah, it's a typical McCartney sing-along or whatever you call them. He did quite a lot of work on it. I was ill after the accident when they did most of that track, and I believe he really ground George and Ringo into the ground recording it.
In 2008, Ringo singled out the session for this track as being, quote, the worst session ever. George too complained, saying, sometimes Paul would make us do these really fruity songs. I mean, my God, Maxwell's Silver Hammer was so fruity. In his book The Lyrics, Paul recalls that, quote, I was very keen on this song, but it took too long to record, and the rest of the guys were getting pissed off with me. It's a song Paul has never played live, and it seems has now, like one of Maxwell's victims, been knocked on the head. In June 1964, the Beatles did the unthinkable. They went on their first world tour without their drummer, Ringo Starr. Jimmie Nicol, the man who replaced him for 10 days, became the only person outside the Fab Four to experience what it was really like to be a Beatle. Hello, it's George Martin. What are you doing for the next 4 days? Ringo is ill, and we want you to take his place on the Beatles tour. Be at Abbey Road Studios at 3 p.m. The Beatles want to run through some numbers with you. With the press gone, the three remaining Beatles ran Jimmy through half a dozen songs from their current stage routine, which were I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, I Saw Her Standing There, This Boy, Can't Buy Me Love, and Long Tall Sally. Jimmy passed the audition with flying colours. He was hired. Nicol's style of drumming was different to Ringo's. Although they used the same matched grip on the sticks, Jimmy's style was much more staccato than Ringo's, bringing his sticks down onto the drums, producing a brighter tone. Overall, Nicol was no slouch, and what's more, the Beatles had confidence in him. Nicol and Lennon continued to bond on the long flight to Sydney. They seemed to share the same sense of humour and both enjoyed talking about music. This got Nicol thinking that there may even be a remote possibility of him replacing Ringo in the band, but he knew he'd have to sweeten up George, who was fiercely loyal to Ringo.
I like he can't do that.
What do you like, Jimmy? How about you, Jim? You haven't seen anything.
Yeah,
How do you feel, Jimmy, being
that.
in with the Beatles?
Pardon?
How do you feel being in with the Beatles, a newcomers, standing in for Ringo?
It's a good experience, man.
How is Ringo?
He's much better. He joins them on Sunday.
What do you do then, Jimmy?
I go back to London and they're fixing up a band for me and I do some television.
And he's away?
Yeah.
You're progressing pretty well with your Beatle haircut.
Yeah, well, I've been growing it for about 3 months.
How long does it take to get a magnificent mane like this?
I don't know, I can't remember being without it.
Do you ever go to the barbers, John?
No, you know, I haven't had my haircut since the film. The woman on the film cut it good, but I don't trust anybody else. So.
Ringo's plane touched down at Sydney's Mascot Airport, where he was met by a crowd of journalists and photographers. Meanwhile, across the continent in Adelaide, the Beatles were making their way to the airport to fly to Melbourne, where they would reunite with Ringo. But for Jimmy, the prospect of all this coming to an end had yet to sink in, and he continued to bask in the adulation like it would never end. At 8 a.m, Jimmy and Brian Epstein drove to the airport, and because the rest of the Beatles were still sleeping, Jimmy never got the chance to say goodbye to them. While Brian chatted with the tour's promoter, Jimmy was left sitting alone, a moment which was captured in this iconic and incredibly powerful photo, which was one that would follow him all his life. Do you remember the time the Beatles made a cartoon?
Wrong one.
Class.
The challenge for Team Brodax was to get the characters designed, find scriptwriters, audition voices, find a studio to create the magic, and find sponsors for the show, all in less than a year. The task of finding the actors to portray the voices of the group was the final piece of the series puzzle. The choices made by Brodax and his team were very controversial, and quite possibly the main reason that fans are unfamiliar with the series unless they watched the original broadcasts in the 1960s or the syndicated version in the 1970s. Brodax felt that if he hired voice actors from the Beatles' hometown of Liverpool, no American child would understand the accents. He wanted the voices to be what he called an Americanized version of a Liverpool accent. For the voices of Paul and Ringo, British actor Lance Percival was chosen. Percival was already established in the entertainment business in Britain, with roles in the groundbreaking satirical TV show That Was the Week That Was, and by appearing in an early Carry On film, Carry On Cruising. He'd even recorded a few records with their producer George Martin on Parlophone.
So clear, old mate, you're gonna have to wait for the other one behind you.
The actor chosen to voice John and George was Paul Frees, which was a major point of contention then and continues to be so to this day. They liked it at first, recalled Lance Percival, but then they got picky. I didn't hear what John was saying, but Paul was sitting in front of me asking who was doing his voice. Ringo was okay with it all, but commented that I made him the dum-dum, and I told him that it wasn't me, it was how the scripts are written. The screening room soon became one big party as the food and booze began to flow, and at one point someone noticed that John was missing. After a brief search, Norman Kaufman found him hiding under one of the buffet tables. He was tired and didn't feel like being a Beatle for a few minutes, so he went and hid. Norman tried to coax John out, but he insisted on staying put beneath the table and asked Kaufman to get him a bottle of wine, which they proceeded to drink from under the table until the two of them were found. The first cartoon to be seen was A Hard Day's Night, which featured the group trying to find a quiet place to rehearse. Which turned out to be Transylvania, where monstrous mayhem ensued. ABC would have to wait approximately 2 weeks for word about whether their groundbreaking cartoon show was worth the enormous gamble taken by all parties involved. It was indeed. The series opened with an almost unprecedented 51.9% share of the viewing audience. You may have seen me unboxing these tapes in a video on the channel a few months ago, but that wasn't the end of the story. These are well-travelled tapes, and over the past 43 years, they've been to Australia, then back to the UK in 2022, after which they went to the US, and now they're back in Europe. That's a rough life for this delicate media, and who knows what, if anything, is still on them. There was only one way to find out, and that was to play them. Unfortunately, my Revox B77 tape recorder can only go up to 15 inches per second. And the pancake reels these tapes were stored on were too big and too delicate to be played on such a machine. So I needed to find somewhere which A, had the proper equipment to play them on, and B, someone with the skills and experience of handling tapes such as these. There was only one place in my mind that I could think of to do the job properly. And that was the place these tapes originally came from. Abbey Road Studios. So I got in touch with who I consider to be the best man for the job, who, if you've been watching this channel recently, you'll be familiar with. And that was Miles Shoal. Miles is one of the best and most experienced mastering and cutting engineers in the business. His half-speed vinyl cuttings are legendary, and having worked with tape for over 40 years, definitely had all the skills and knowledge needed to get the best out of these tapes. And to my amazement and delight, he agreed to do it. And better still, I could come along to watch.
Here. Okay, now I've just threaded it through. Used to do this all day, every day in the 1980s. So, I'm a little concerned about the tape here where it's come away slightly, haven't got a clean wind on the pack. If I rewind this very quickly to this take-up spool, there's just a small chance it could actually explode and the tape flies off. And we really don't want that to happen. So we're going to wind it super slowly. It's not very high tech. There's the edit function for this machine. And you can just move the thing, push on that and move it slowly like this. However, like that, the tape's actually engaged with the heads. So we're going to do a very high tech thing. You can, I think what you have to do is take that round there and basically stop it from, let's try that. Will that do it? Yeah, it will. There you go. So that, low tech, and it's winding slowly. Okay, I'm going to switch to hand control now. We're actually rewinding this slower than 30 IPS. So we're going slower than playing it back. Whoa, let's go right down here. Don't like it. I don't like it. And breathe. So the good news is this is on BASF tape, which doesn't generally suffer from the problems of sticky shed syndrome, where the tape just goes sticky and is difficult to play. Bad news is it's a little bit dusty, so we are getting a little bit of debris come off the tape, which one concerned may clog the heads. So I'm actually going to transfer this track by track and clean the machine down between every song. And then once it's in the workstation here, I'll edit it all together and make a new rendered file of the whole thing. Yeah, dust coming up here.
But not oxide or anything.
No, it's white stuff really. It's all pretty good.
Just dust from storage and
Yeah,
the years.
mould. I'm probably being a bit overcautious by cleaning it after every song, but we don't want to run the tape again.
No.
So let's just err on the side of caution here. Okay, let's leave it a few seconds to dry. Right, next song. Right.
But no sooner had Miles pressed play on side 2 that he noticed something concerning.
Sounds like it's been x-rayed. Let's run that again.
Really? What did you hear? I didn't hear anything.
Thumping on the left-hand side. Let's run that again. Let's leave it there. We'll leave the machine.
Unfortunately, it seemed that the tape had been stored at some point in its life next to a magnetic source and had suffered some partial demagnetization in one channel.
Just double check that it's not me going crazy, and that is. Yeah, listen.
Oh, yeah.
The tape ended with a 4-second 15 kHz tone and just under 3 seconds or 1 revolution of gobbledygook for the runout. So my time at Abbey Road was done. Thanks once again to Universal for allowing me in this incredible place, and to last week's star Matthew Cocker for sharing some of his knowledge and stories. But most of all, thank you to Miles, one of the kindest and most generous people I've met in the business for a long time. I'll be back next week, but in the meantime, why not take a look at some of the other 200 plus Beatles videos on the channel? There really is something there for everyone. But that's all for this time, so I'll say bye for now, and thanks for watching.